Hello, ladies and gents. Thank you very much for coming. Hello also to our online audience, of which I was told this morning we had 90 something, which is far more than I imagined. So thank you for coming, even though you didn't get a free lunch. My name is Toby. I'm head of communications for the scientific advice mechanism to the European Commission. And I am joined by three eminent experts, two sitting beside me here and one who will shortly appear on the screen in front of you, I'm assured. Can we see Jackie on the screen? Hello. So Jacqueline Broerse is a professor at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, and she is a member of the expert group on the International Platform for Food System Science. To my right, your left, Gonçalo das Neves is the chief scientist of the European Food Safety Authority, and a little further along, Lambin is a professor at the Catholic University of Louvain and also Stanford University jointly. And he is a member of the group of chief scientific advisors to the European Commission, part of the scientific advice mechanism for whom I also work. So we're going to talk this afternoon about food, specifically about food systems. It's a topic that I think is of interest to nearly everyone, and it's one that's not short of controversies. In fact, Eric was mentioning before we started, he's being asked to do 5 talks this week alone on the topic. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, partly because of the controversy and the universal interest, and for other reasons, it's also a kind of poster child topic for this idea of deep complexity. So it's a topic where there are very many complexities and very many uncertainties, and nonetheless, policymakers need scientific advice to guide their policy making. And so in the next hour and a bit, I would like to explore not just why food systems are a particularly interesting and complex topic and what the issues are there, but also more generally about what that kind of complexity implies for how science advisors do their job and how policymakers take on board, or not, scientific evidence. So we'll start with a quick round of opening remarks. We'll go first to Jacqueline, who's joining us online. Hello.
Hello. Here I am.
Jacqueline, what is it that makes the science of food systems so complex? And what's the poor policymaker to do when faced with these complexities?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here, albeit virtually. I prepared a few slides, so if you allow me, I will share my screen.
Please do.
And there's always a bit of a delay there and a quick change. So I hope you can see my screen now.
Not yet. We'll let you know when.
Oh. Then I will, wait a minute, share again.
Looks promising. Yes, we see you.
Looks promising, right? And now I go to the presentation mode and quickly swap my screens. Now it should be okay.
Perfect. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great.
Photo of what I presume is your university in Amsterdam.
It's my university in Amsterdam. Yes, yes, certainly. Okay. I would like to start basically with our current health systems. Our food systems. They have given rise to a range of serious challenges that we're facing today. And first of all, many people don't have easy access to a sustainable, healthy food, leading to unhealthy diets. And if you know that more than half of the adults in Europe nowadays are classified as overweight, we are talking about a serious problem, also a health problem, given the growing incidence this causes with respect to diet-related health problems such as diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Well, at the same time, we see many small-scale farmers, farm workers actually not earning a living wage. And besides these health and social challenges, the food system is associated with considerable environmental challenges. Think about the negative effects on soil, water, biodiversity. And 20% of food produced is currently wasted. And overall, the food system is a strong contributor to climate change. So we have a rapidly growing awareness that we should do things differently. We cannot continue doing business as usual. We urgently need to radically change our food system if we want it to be healthy and sustainable. And there is a growing plea amongst others from the European Commission for good governance to guide this transition. Now, science can be a very good catalyst for this transformation, not only as usually it can lead to better understanding of the extent of the problem and its causes, but more importantly, it can develop evidence-based technical and social innovations, and science can provide insights into the transformation process itself. Now, unfortunately, reality has been so far quite sobering, because science has so far produced limited sustainability gains and progress has been slow. So what's going wrong? Of course, there's lots to say about what's wrong on the policy side, but here I would really like to dive into the science side. There's a growing consensus that the results of science are not sufficiently actionable to support food system transformation, and that this is due to the way research usually takes place. Typically, what we see is that the food challenges are broken down in solvable sub-problems and approached then in a very linear way. This creates a divide between science on the one hand and policy and society on the other, resulting in this well-known implementation gap, but is really, really profound when we look at food system transformation. Now, how can we change this? Now, it's important to realize that the food system is a complex adaptive system, and that we need to change our perception of the food system as this linear food supply chain. And that this is really a gross oversimplification of a system that in reality looks much more like this. And when dealing with a complex adaptive system, you need a research approach that does justice to this complexity and not being a reductionistic linear approach. So it requires a systems approach. That means that in research, you include all different elements, practices, actors, and interactions related to that food system when designing and implementing innovations and advising policy, in order to anticipate also the many synergies and trade-offs that are the result of these very intricate feedback loops. And I explicitly mention these actors because the problems that affect our food system will only be solved if these different actor groups that operate within it fully engage with the challenges and work towards this transformation of the food system. And for this to happen, we really need concerted activities across not only different disciplines, but also the interest and the knowledges. Now, you already mentioned it, everyone at the table, the high-level expert group. Well, food system transformation really requires high-level and sustained political commitment. And in 2021, the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation established this high-level expert group to advise the European Commission on needs and options for strengthening science policy interfaces. And as a member of the expert group, I was part of the many discussions that took place. And we were asked to address the gaps in the provision of science and evidence for these improved food systems governance. Here's a picture of the report we wrote. And well, we concluded that the way in which society is involved in science policy processes needs a thorough rethink. And I will summarize the recommendations, some of the main recommendations. First of all, policy and decision makers must make use of not only the best scientific evidence, but also other forms of knowledge, indigenous and experiential knowledge to support food systems transformation. So actually, research should not be just interdisciplinary, but should be transdisciplinary. Science and policy should fully adopt the food systems lens and should connect with citizens and other relevant stakeholders, convene multi-stakeholder dialogues, and build a collective knowledge base which addresses real obstacles to transformative change. And that actually means that science policy interfaces should become science policy society interfaces, acting at multiple levels, not only national or European or global levels, but also the local level. And when you think of interfaces at local level, you could very much think of food policy networks that actively engage all these relevant actors. And then together conduct a local, because food systems are place-based, they are very local. Analyze the food systems and its challenges, develop visions, and co-create technical and social interventions, test these through actions, learning cycles in living labs. So have actual experimentation included in these governance processes, so that the lessons learned from the living lab can really result in integrated food policies and then working towards these different levels. And a last note that I would like to make is, I think that's highly relevant for the discussion we are going to have, is that when assessing these current science policy interfaces regarding food, what we did in the expert group, actually we found none that were currently implementing these requirements that just were formulated. So in other words, there is a lot of work to do, I would say. Thank you.
There's been so much there for us, I was going to say to chew over, but so much there for us to talk about. May I ask you a brief follow-up question?
Sure.
Just something that crossed my mind. You showed us that, I suspect, deliberately complex diagram, right, of the food system. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Which, of course, the detail was far too small for us to see, even on our enormous screen here, which is kind of the point. But it strikes me that it doesn't just communicate complexity, it also communicates detail. There is a lot of detail on that.
Yeah.
And that makes me worry a little bit. If we can't break this thing down into sub-problems and solve them one by one, how can we possibly approach them? Now, a brief answer, maybe a hint towards the answer if you have one.
Well, it means that you need to do things a lot of simultaneously. And initially, in such living labs that work on different levels, you won't have the complexity all in one. But you cannot leave out things. So you will, through spirals, go to increasing levels of understanding. But not by breaking it up in bits and pieces, but looking at the whole and then slowly starting to increase your understanding. Excellent. Chopping it up in parts is not going to do it.
Yeah, because the parts interact in ways that we don't.
Yeah, and parts are relevant. You might want to dive into depth in some points, but then from the holistic perspective.
Yeah.
Zoom into some specific elements.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Carlos, the same question to you. Why are food systems complex, and what does that mean when we're advising policymakers about them?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you in the room and online. Also prepare some slides, so you see we have coordinated ourselves a little bit and divided a little what to do, but we all will address a little of complexity. So I would just ask the colleagues to put the slides on. And from our side, I think it's also important to give a context. I'm here as the Chief Science of the European Food Safety Authority. I suppose for all of you working on food, you will know us. But it's always good to set the stage. And this helps for making also one of my first statements. First what we do, we provide independent scientific advice and support for risk managers to take their decisions. A principle that has now been enshrined in European law for 20 years of a clear division between those providing the assessment, those making the decisions. Assessments based on science. But we go further, of course, and we also are engaged in communication and promoting cooperation. I will get to that. But I think also being the number 2 here today highlights what I would like to say sometimes. I'm the middleman in this stafette between going from science to policy. Not saying that we're not scientists. I'm happy that I have more than 600 colleagues, many of them scientists.
Carlos, I'm sorry to interrupt you. They're back. You may continue. Sorry, your slides vanished, but they're back. Sorry.
No, they're there. That's okay. Still there. But of course, we work in the regulatory sciences, so perhaps not the science as many think of doing something on the lab, but we need to be able to harness this knowledge, collect, make sense of it, and then provide it in an acceptable, understandable, and actionable format so that others may act upon it. And the middleman can sometimes be a complex job. So we've all tried to make a slide that looks messy. This is my attempt. But I think Jacqueline is winning today. But if she showed the complexity of food system science, this is more or less our daily life when we go from policy to science, to policy to science, to policy to science. It's easy to understand that in Europe, food safety is not the matter of one single policy. I chose there on the left side just 5 examples of policies of the Union, whether it is global health policy, farm to fork, biodiversity, chemical sustainability, all policies that impact food. Because they do, they generate a demand, a request for an advice, which is what we act on. First level of complexity, we're being met by different needs to address different issues related to food. To make this more complex, even, and because perhaps correctly, the topic covers different disciplines, we're not able to solve it ourselves. And we count more and more in doing this as a teamwork. Transdisciplinarity means bringing different people on board. So we have our sister agencies, because some of these issues on food impact human health, could be diseases. We have the Center for Disease Control, if it's a chemicals with ECHA, and so on and so forth, the environment, and of course the medicine agents. But that's not enough. Even though I have 600 amazing colleagues in Parma, we can't get the job done alone. Because food is more complex than just, a toxicology study or a microorganism characterization. It's the interconnection of these topics. It's a lot of measurements. More and more is also social parameters, a complexity of new innovative technologies. And for that, we need all of Europe. So we bring to this science to policy 650 experts, more than 300 academic institutions, the private stakeholders, and of course, on the last, we bring all the member states and the science that they are doing. And when I get this all together, we make an opinion, try to be short and concise, not always succeeding, and we bring it back to policy, hoping that it will enable them to act, enable them to change. First challenge of this complexity, it can take 3 years to make a policy, 4 or 5 years for us to harness and deliver an opinion, 3 or 4 more years for them to change, to regulate, to legislate. And after these 12 years, the scientists will tell us, out of date, not innovative, obsolete. So one of the challenges of this complexity in food safety is how to get the gaps closed scientifically and how to make this system work in even more fine-tuned and quicker. And for that, I would like to say that science to policy is no longer just producing a document out there in the middle, 2 traditional outputs from EFSA, a zoonosis report and an antimicrobial report. We put this information in front of the Commission and they can act. Those are the traditional outputs, but more and more, we're looking also that science to policy includes other outputs. Outputs links to engaging with society, whether it is the citizen or also the private sector, which I don't think I need to say in food sector, are a big player. And that's, for example, campaigns like the ones we have, for example, ongoing right now, Plant Health for Life. But also on the right-hand side, you see that's an infographic of a dashboard. Another way to make science to policy work is to enable science, to connect science. And we do that, for example, by harnessing data from all the member states and connecting this data, creating a large amount of information available to all the scientists, that this will harness future science to work perhaps quicker and also sometimes more directed to what are the needs of the agencies, of these authorities. So to finalize, I would say that science to policy, and I hear 4 pieces of the puzzle, it's not just the political management and the research innovation or the risk assessors. So that transversal line is good, is traditional, but it's not enough. It means that we need also that science to policy depends that our citizens understand also the opinions that we send to Brussels, that we create an understanding, not an agreement, but an understanding on how it was done, what does it mean, so that you can take your informed decisions. I like to say everyone knows better about food, so everyone should be able to make informed decisions. And it means that we need to, of course, interact with the private sector, keeping very clear red lines and transparency, but realizing that they are a major catalyzer for innovation in the field of foods, an interested party, contributing with a lot of science and doing this work. When I made this picture the first time, I put F's in the middle. They told me you like to be quartered, medieval time, pushed in 4 directions. Not always, but here I would say yes. And if I was with the Commission, I would say this is more difficult if you don't have the right resources, the right investment, not just resources for us, EFSA, resources for many of you scientists, that you have the funding to do the science we need, that I have the people to be able to understand it, and that together we can explain it to the politician, to the industry, to other scientists, and to everyone on the street who ends up eating these and asking about this. So it's complex, it's doable, and we're not there yet.
Thank you very much indeed. It's always good to hear about the importance of communication, not just between science and policymakers, but more broadly. It struck my mind when you say about being the middleman. Yeah, it's complex, not just in the way that Jacqueline was describing. It's complex to understand the system and know what to change. It's also a complex system means a complex web of organizations, interactions, stakeholders, and so on, and you have to be able to navigate that as well. It's quite a task.
It is, and this is something that I think we are, here I feel positive, that we are making an effort. The Commission is making an effort, but these agencies, and we speak, for example, around food safety, speak usually of these 5 agencies: the European Food Safety, the Medicines Agency, the Chemical Agency, the Environment Agency, more and more as well, and the ECDC. We are making an effort to work together a little. We're using, of course, One Health, you know, the connectivity of disciplines, of needs. They are a reality in most of the aspects related to food. I say food is the best example of One Health. So because the reality is interlinked, it's crazy not to work interlinked. But of course we have our regulations, we have some siloed that we're trying to break. I notice personally, the Commission is trying to break these silos also with the policies, much more transversal policies, bridging different areas. We try to mimic this, but it takes time, it takes resources, it takes a lot of resources. In our case, as I said, we depend on more than 650 researchers across Europe. So it's not just me agreeing with ECHA or EA. I still need the help of another 600 people to do my job. So yeah, it's the complex is not just on Jacqueline's picture, it's also on the actors and stakeholders around this web.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, and then Eric, moving somewhat further upstream, so the policies that are eventually inherited by the agencies, originally set in the first case by the European Commission, or drafted by them at least, and you're a member of the group of advisors that advises the commissioners on how to do that. So what are the challenges from your perspective?
Yes, let me start by saying that, science advice really cover a whole spectrum from the kind of daily routine advice, for running the system, all the way at the other spectrum of science advice to really transform the system quite deeply. And in that report that you mentioned, so we published this scientific opinion on how to transform consumption to be more sustainable and more healthy, jointly with the group of chief scientific advisors and the SAPEA network of experts. And this is really about food system transformation. It's really a kind of a very, very deep change where we take all these existing niche innovations that have been validated by science, including by your institute, Carlos, and others, but how to align them and make sure that they really kind of shift the way we consume and produce food to make it more sustainable. So, it's really about scaling up all these niche innovations and replacing an existing food system regime. And that's a big source of complexity, because it's not just about upscaling, the blue curve, things like alternative to meat, plant-based proteins and other products, or different supply chain organizations, or different labeling schemes, and different retail behavior where you place the most sustainable and healthy products in a way that's very attractive. So not only how do you upscale that, but also it's how to phase out the existing regime, because the point is to replace an existing regime. And we're pretty good at doing the former, the blue curve, but really bad at doing the latter, the phasing out. There's been some studies where in some retail outlets, the alternative to meat products have been displayed with a discount price, with good advertisement, very good placement, and indeed the sales of this product did increase, but in no way the sale of the meat products decreased at the same time. They were just adding this. We see exactly the same in the energy sector, where there's massive effort to increase production through solar and wind, and that's really increasing exponentially. But in no way this is replacing fossil fuels. It's just adding energy capacity because very little policy attention is being put at the phasing out of the dominant regime. And that's a very, very tricky and difficult task to do for policymakers because it's about penalizing, just to try to kind of kick out of the market this dominant regime which has been there for decades, that are very, very well organized, and of course that will fiercely resist the attempt to being phased out in favor of these others. And so that does require really a mix of policies that are well aligned, based on one hand, a lot of good information, reporting, labeling, etc. Also a set of incentives, kind of lower price, but also some disincentives, some taxes on the products you want to phase out. And also a few mandates, policy mandates, the type of command and control interventions where somehow you have to push the system to make sure this happens across the board. But the challenge here again in policy advising is not enough to just make the list of all possible interventions. And in our report, we have known less than 18 different recommendations. But if they would each kind of be implemented randomly, you would not do the trick. It's all about creating the synergies between these different interventions, finding the right sequencing of these interventions. For instance, we know that kind of a disincentive on products whose excessive consumption is unhealthy or unsustainable would work best, but this would be much more socially acceptable if it's preceded by some very good information campaign to explain and justify why it's important to make that transition. So that sequencing is really, really important. At the same time, you need to make sure that these other products are available and affordable and accessible. So that's what Jacqueline was talking about. Just all these feedbacks, all these things have to happen at the same time. So as in that case, the science advice is really about proposing what's the package, what's the policy mix, what the kind of sequence, and how to make sure that it's implemented in a way that it's all going into the same direction. And you have to do that at the same time as you have to deal with enormous resistance from the former established incumbent system that, of course, wants to kick the newcomers, this niche innovation out of the market or contain them to a very low market share, and have intensive lobbying to justify why they should just maintain the things, the status quo from which they've been benefiting for a very long time. And that's where the boundary between science advice and politics becomes very blurry, because of course as a scientist you should not go too much into the actual policy making, but just make sure you provide all the evidence for the policymakers to understand that you have this complexity across multiple sectors, multiple scales to really achieve this transformation.
Thank you. Well, so that's a very good insight that I picked up from that I hadn't kind of absorbed before myself, is this idea of that phasing out an existing regime is much harder than phasing in something new. And it's okay to say, like, the advisors give the advice to the policymakers and then the policymakers decide what to do. But when you've got a big, complex, multifaceted piece of advice, is there a danger that when you give it to the policymakers, they can look at it and say, like, well, this, and this, I can see that's a path to do it, so we'll do that. Those look really difficult because of all the existing vested interests, so we'll set those to one side, and that then looks like a balanced decision, right? We've taken on board some, but not all, and we've done our job. And what you're saying is that if you do that, you don't get the outcome that you hope for.
Exactly, and what's happening exactly what you said. They just pick and choose the kind of low-hanging fruit, what will be not too controversial, socially acceptable, but not having the full package just kind of doesn't guarantee that it will have the result that is expected. So that's why in our recommendation, the very first one is, it is all about policy mix. It's do it all, don't pick and choose. And that's the essence of really what we are proposing. Just go along the full triangle here, rather than just pick what would be easy and acceptable.
Great. I want to pursue that line a little more, actually, with all three of the panelists. If we can have Jacqueline back on the screen, that would be great. Just before we do, though, I want to also mention that we have a good-sized audience here in the room and one also online. And we have a roving microphone. So if you would like to contribute to the discussion, either with a comment or a question in the room, you're welcome to by raising your hand and grabbing the mic. Or if you prefer, by going to Slido, where we already have some people online submitting their questions. You can do that in the room here too. So if you go to slido.com and then enter the hashtag #S4P conference, as in Science for Policy conference, you can type your question in there and it will come up on this screen here and we can read it out if you're a bit too shy to want to grab a mic and shout. I see one question here already. I see okay, great. We will need our microphone. Okay, all right. While you are fighting over yourselves, the first hand is always the gentleman here at the front on the left. Yeah. But yeah, so Carlos and Jacqueline, if we can have her back, on this issue of how to persuade policymakers that the policy mix is important and not just that they can pick and choose from a shopping list.
Yeah, just a comment to what you were mentioning. Of course, this cherry picking, it's part of the game, if I can put it like that. Yeah. And we need to accept that it is part of the politician, of the policymaker, empowered by the people. At least that's the most usual case for most of us, thank God, in Europe. Will make decisions that need to account for all these other aspects that perhaps we will not put in our report. That said, the scientists can go also. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, we don't perhaps do that much ourselves in EFSA because it's not part of the way we work. But I'm thinking of for example, the IPCC's reports. That they will make it very clear the stand. You need 1.5 degree reduction. And they went further, and they already put there the 5 other scenarios at 1, 1.2, 0.8, more or less showing that any of them will be a catastrophe, as a way to also help the policymaker to understand that here you get the desired result, 0.3 degrees lower. This is the trade-off, because sometimes trade-off also needs science to make informed decisions, or I would say we would benefit. Sometimes the trade-off is a political single-based decision, or economic or social, but it could also have a good scientific background. And if the policymaker is also more active in asking us that, scientists or organizations that collect science and advice, we would be perhaps, we would have a more productive cherry picking, if I can say that.
Gotcha, yes, makes sense. Jacqueline, do you want to add anything on this point?
Yeah, yes, I would like to add something there. I think what you still see now is in the discussion that there is this divide between science and policy. So we have a package that the scientists prepare, or the intermediary prepares for the policymaker. However, when we are talking about this complex mix and this need for integration, because just like science, policy is also highly fragmented. And food policy has this problem of being fragmented over different departments within municipalities, within national governments. It's not within one ministry, it's scattered over 3-4 ministries. So what we are trying to do at the local level, because, well, that's where my own experimental work is most located at the moment, is that we really have policymakers sit at the table together in the experiments that we're doing. It's a joint learning process. It's not handing over a package to the policymakers. It's bringing them into the process of analysis and experimentation and learning. And it is, but of course, you need to have policymakers that are willing to do that are given the opportunity to do that. But if that takes place, then you can navigate in this huge complexity and get over these, build these bridges to actually overcome this fragmentation.
Yeah, so goodwill is needed. Yeah.
Yeah, you do need goodwill, of course. Yeah, but it is also a commitment to the goal of we really need to do and want to do things differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is this political commitment to that end, and we see that this changes regularly. Yeah? So the change of that political commitment to the issue of food system transformation is complicated in itself.
Yeah, understood. Did the microphone make its way to Ellie? Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Yes, I'm Elias from the Joint Research Center. First of all, thank you all for this series of great presentations. I was quite struck by the number you shared, Carlos, on the time span between the formulation of the policy and then sort of the feedback back into the policy, 12 years. Yeah, that's complete mayhem. And you shared some of the levers you're pulling right now to shorten that time span and make it more iterative. And they're mostly on sort of different ways of communications. I was wondering if you were also thinking about different levers that could be pulled, for example, different organizational setups, task forces, etc. Because I don't know, it seems like only communication is not going to create the biggest bang on this problem. So what other levers are you considering? Thank you.
I can take that one. First, let's do the disclaimer. We can be much quicker than 12 years. Huh? Not we, EFSA, but the entire European system. We came out of a pandemic. We've seen it is possible to drive policy to action and activate science quick. And even within food safety, we have some areas where well-regulated, good rules, good scientific advice allows for a quick output. I agree with you that communication and linkages of organizations doesn't take us all the way. And here I don't think I need to lobby very hard for things like a better connection on data and the use of new technologies. We have AI that can potentiate a speed on the way we do this. You just need to think that one of our jobs when we are asked to give an opinion about something is to go through thousands of publications. There can be thousands of scientific publications that need to be assessed. We need to decide if they are valid, to which extent, what's the weight of their inputs. AI can speed this. We have also new technologies that also on the science front can speed up some of the studies that could perhaps take some months or years to achieve, and now through different new technologies in the lab, in vitro systems, so on, can be done in a much shorter of time. So if the scientist is also quicker, I will be able to also quicker get my job done. So yes, not just communication, but harnessing novelty, innovation in science, in technology, in data, in information systems will also help to close these gaps quicker and quicker.
Thank you.
That's why GRC was in the list, by the way.
Yeah. For the audience at home, I see the questions on Slido, and I would very much like to take them. I want to just finish off this little discussion we have right now with a couple of comments in the room, and then we'll move on to some of the topics that you're raising online. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes. So my name is Anastasia Del Gheuri. I come from JRC, as Elias does, on the same unit, Science for Democracy. And since my main work relates to courses and training and building capacity both for scientists and policymakers in this evidence-informed policymaking, I would like to ask all the panelists from their experience, because they're working the science for policy front in some perspective, either being the middleman or directly from one side or the other, what kind of problems you have mainly encountered in this relations between science and policy, and what are kind of competencies you think policymakers need to address this kind of problems that are really complex, that are really bringing a lot of debate, and sometimes difficult to navigate even in the kind of specifics on these problems. And another question, if I may, and I won't dominate the discussion, just if I may ask another question. I know it's not science for policy, but I would like to ask in terms of food policies, how the specific culture is taken into account or has an impact, or how it has been measured in how you make food policies, because I think it's highly correlated to the kind of effectiveness that these policies may have in a short term or in a long term. I will stop here because I have many questions, but thank you very much for the brilliant presentations and all the different points that you brought in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to comment on either of those?
Maybe on the first one, I think, well, first, I don't have a lot of experience. I've only been doing that for 2 years, so I'm learning by doing. But I think it's the same skills that you need to be a good teacher, or a good public speaker, someone who is able to make science accessible, clear, in few sentences, with few numbers and few jargon. And just also make it very intriguing. So you really catch the attention. Oh, really? I never thought about this impact here. Let me make sure that I integrate that in my thinking about this problem. Personally, in the way I'm presenting the report we produce to policymakers, or the way I would present it to my students, or if I do a public talk, could be kind of the same, except that there's an extra dimension I think that's really important, and that's the best advice I was given when I started this role. And actually, I heard it on this conference last year or 2 years ago. Remember, there was a young lady, and she said, "Well, if you want to be listened to, start by listening to them." And I say, "Oh, really?" Yes. And so maybe something that you also have to do as a good teacher and as a good public speaker. You just try to understand what's the thinking of your audience and where they are in their understanding of the problem, and take that as a starting point to start to develop your communication.
Great. Jacqueline, I don't know if either of you want to comment quickly
Yeah,
on this.
I would really like to, because I would like to add to it to what Eric said, because I fully agree with him. The general science communication skills are extremely important. The listening is key, but I would also say reflexive learning, mutual. So learning from the openness to each other, and not just sticking to your own mandate and your own thinking that you know best or so, but really realizing that you can only get out of here together, and not by persuading the other per se, but really working together in a joint experimental fashion. And that's something that in many cases we don't learn that much yet in universities. And I think that the person who asked the question knows very well, because that's why they're undoubtedly giving regular courses and webinars on this, because I think we should enhance these competencies. There's really a need for it.
Thank you very much. Sophie, I think you wanted to comment on the discussion we've had so far.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Then after this, if we maybe we'll move on to a different area.
I actually want to share a good practice on everything that's been said, all about listening to the community, to the people, also about complexity. So I've worked for the last 4 years for an NGO on promoting local food. And we actually worked to collaborated a lot with the Flemish Research Institute for Agriculture and Food. So we were involved in, I think, 2 or 3 projects in the last 4 years. I think a lot of the researchers were actually member of our organization. That helps. And what we saw, so we also connected the researchers to the farmers that we were working with. So the farmers were directly involved in the research. And what it gave was that the research questions were more relevant for us. But also what we saw is whenever there was a research project finished, we for instance, would set up a webinar for the farmers where the researcher could directly, like a month after finishing the research, they were informing the farmers about their results. Like, that is direct impact. Also, what I thought they did really well was dealing with the complexity, and the way they did that was always take 2 fields together. So they would look at both ecological impact and economic impact of forestry, agriculture, something like that. Or they would look at both social and economic impact of changing your supply chain as a farmer. And I think by making these links every time, even though it's always just 2 fields, in the end, I think you connect all of the different fields. But you can never have the whole complexity in one research project. That's impossible. So if as a researcher you're looking for inspiration, I strongly recommend to go look at that Flemish Institute. And actually, I know that 10 years ago our farmers were really complaining about the institute, and now they're happy with it. So it's been a very quick change in the mentality of the researchers.
Very good, thank you. We will take a couple of questions at a time now in interest of time, and I want to take a couple from, one from the online contributions, which also connects to something that's been mentioned here and also talking about the culture issue, which is this issue of contestedness. So that the commenter online says, how can science advice help phase out incumbent systems which are profitable and defended by powerful interests? Does science need to take the side of public interest? Which I think is an excellent question to add a bit of spice, pun not intended, to the conversation. And there's also this issue of like engaging with the existing culture, and also about where the contestedness lies, if it is just in vested interest defending those interests, or whether there's also some contestedness in the science as well, or in the kind of, people have the same objective but maybe see different ways to approach that. I'd like to offer that to the panelists, and then we'll take a question from the gentleman here in the red jumper and the gentleman here in the other red jumper. But first, panelists, yeah, sure, Eric.
Well, first, I just find it really an excellent question. And I'm really struggling daily with that one. Right now, our report has been out, and now we know there's a massive lobbying campaign to just maintain the status quo, to delay the new framework on sustainable food. And I'm, as I said, I'm invited to talk to a number of panels just this week. And of course, scientists never take sides. You just present, the scientific evidence. But on the other hand, what we're pushing for is a series of transformations for the common good, for the public good. And the young generation, they are not there to defend their interests here. Animal welfare, they have no voice in this debate. And what's the when do you start to be kind of an activist, when you defend the common good, or whether you stick to the hard science? It's personally, I've not solved that question. Mm-hmm. But still, as a science advisor, you can always just go back to some mechanisms for which there's scientific evidence. For example, some tax that integrate the externalities in the price of some goods, have a major impact on the environment, on public health, on animal welfare, is a fully validated scientific mechanism for which there's plenty of evidence that this works. It does change behavior. And so here you stick with the science, but still, you're pushing for mechanisms that will actually defend the public good.
Carlos.
Yeah, I also had a comment on the first question. Thank you very much for that person. First, a little here. Let me address a second. Does science need to take the side of public interests? I would say it's always bad when science starts to take sides. That scientists who have values, who have preferences, who have likes, want to express them. Totally on board. But science, as a product, we heard this morning, the president of the ERC saying very clear, science, it's about working on the truth, it's to be truthful, to discover the world, how it works. Let's not start to bias it, but we understand people that do science are humans and have preferences. So just to say on that, no, I don't think science should take sides. It should be factual, it should be truthful, and then, of course, it can be actioned. You can use it to defend your positions. And this is true even if you're doing science for a private company, Of course, you have a goal to reach, but the science should be strengthened.
So it's also about science advice, not just doing science, but actually giving science advice.
But on the first one, how can science advice phase out incumbents? I think sometimes, and I'm sorry to bring back communication, but I think we focus a lot on bringing this science advice to the policymaker. Let's not undervalue the importance of sharing also this science advice and the knowledge with the public, with the citizens. 100 scientists may not have sometimes too much weight coming to Brussels or to your local government, but a few thousand voters, a few months ahead of a parliamentary election in Europe or in your country, have a different power. And if they are informed with true facts, because you have the problem of they are informed, not always, with true science, if they are informed about true science that helps shape their opinions, I think they may get there quicker than our reports.
Yeah, thank you. Jacqueline, do you want to add anything on this specific topic of contestedness?
Yeah, I would like to. First, I think it's impossible for science to be neutral, at least because it's work of humans, and humans are always having values. So it might be just in the selection of topics. You already show that you're interested more in this than in that. And if you're conducting research with a societal purpose, addressing some sort of challenge, you already show that you have a certain value. And with respect to phasing out the incumbents, I know there are lots of scientists working actually to further optimizing the incumbent food system. So they actually choose to support making the current system more efficient, slightly changing a bit of the sustainability perhaps, but not really transforming the system. So scientists do make choices about this, and some scientists do team up with specific interests. So, and about the truth, science and the truth, of course, we want to work according to good scientific standards. But to say that we then automatically have the truth, science is complex, huh? Science is very complex, so we try to do our best, let's say.
I don't know how clearly you can see, but Carlos was agreeing with you on that point. Thank you. So, the gentleman, yes, exactly.
Yeah, hello, thank you. My name's David Zarek, probably best known in this room as the risk monger. I tend to ask provocative questions, so I hope you don't mind me being a bit provocative. Is listening to the presentations, Eric, I'd have to disagree with you, it's very subjective. The idea that we must have a food transition is a very subjective statement. Yes. My question basically is, well, the short one, then I'll give a bit of an explanation, is do we seek scientific advice or science policy advice only when there is a will to go through some type of transition? And by the way, energy transition, food transition, it's a euphemism for a revolution, change the whole system. There are no farmers in the room. There's nobody from that evil food industry. And so when you begin to realize that it's just a group of academics talking to a group of regulators, they can start to play on, sort of untethered a little bit from the people who are actually providing the food. And so are we only seeking scientific policy advice when there is an urge to change? And what if the policy advice is, no, actually the food system is the best we can have at the moment? Then
Thank
what?
you very much. We'll take, as I suggested, one more question, and then feel free to address both. Yes, so this gentleman here.
Arnold, active senior in green. Thomas Arnold, active senior in green transition. So I actually asked this first question on Slido on contestedness. So thanks for taking this.
Sneaky, okay.
And I also asked, sorry for staying anonymous.
You can keep it just
the
now.
second
Nobody
question on
this
Slido, and it's about the lessons to be learned for other complex and contested systems.
Okay.
Because the food system, of course, is a very good example.
Yes.
But most of the systems we need to transform, they are complex, they are contested. Let's just take as another prominent example, one of many, the mobility system. There are people, they think the biggest challenge is to build electric vehicles and roll out loading stations, but this ignores that territorial planning can lead to locking in new car dependencies, that housing prices can also lead to decisions where people can afford to live, that the organization of work also is linked to the mobility needs, that certain, let's say, completely unsustainable mobility patterns of the global wealthy, such as private planes, are also substantially contributing to the issue. So again, an area with a lot of contestation. So what lessons can be learned to generalize scientific advice to all of those contested systemic transformations? Thanks.
Thank you. So two, again, spicy questions for the panel to consider. So firstly, about whether we want a food transition and who is talking to whom when that kind of thing is recommended and who's not in the room. And then secondly, the question you just heard. So any of you, please. Eric, sure.
Yeah.
Your question, because it was addressed to me. So the way the science advice mechanisms work in the European Commission has a lot of emphasis of where the question is coming from. You know, it's not us as scientist advisors say, oh, let's just decide we need to transform the food system and let's just provide advice. There's a long process, and Shira knows that very well because she's involved in that, to have a discussion with the different DGs and the different commissioners. And basically they come with the question, and then there's a dialogue where the exact phrasing, the exact scope of the question is actually being discussed, and that can last 6 months, 1 year sometimes. And in the end, that question has to be validated by the College of Commissioners. So if that question comes to our desk, it means there's been at least a 6 months to 1 year process that has recognized the need for that. And that's the first point. Second, you rightly mentioned there's no farmer in the room, but this push for innovation, more sustainable practices actually is coming from the sector itself. There's a lot of innovation within agriculture. There are a lot of farmers of all walk of life that are really trying very hard, different models, but now they are really not competing on a level playing field. They receive much less support in terms of research, commercialization, policies of their practice than the existing system, which is of course logical because there's a whole regulatory infrastructure that's there to just make sure that the existing food system delivers food to feed the planet. But this is really kind of pushing aside the opportunities to test new solutions. And that's one of the question that was asked to us in that specific opinion.
Great, thank you. In a moment, you can do those too. So, Jacqueline, do you want to comment on this discussion?
Yeah, again, I'm very much in line with Eric's answer as well. It is a contested issue. It very much depends on how you look at the consequences that our current farming system has, or food system has, and to what extent you feel that you might lose out if you change. What of course is often said is that our current food system has brought a lot. It has given much higher production of food against pretty low prices. However, it did so at certain costs, which some think are too high, and others say, well, I don't mind. But and I would certainly like to stress that farmers, indeed, I was yesterday at a workshop where about half of the people in the room were farmers, talking about food system transformation and their wish to conduct food production in a totally different way. So, and so far, a lot of incentives are towards the old system. So it is not a fair, it's not a level playing field at all. Not at all. And if you ask farmers, they are pretty squeezed by the input industry and the processing industry and the retail. So many are not happy with the way things are going now, not only with respect to sustainability, but also with respect to the political economy. Because it leaves the power in the hands of just a few big players.
Yeah, thank you very much. Carlos, you're welcome to comment also on this discussion, but there are 2 questions online which I just want to mention because they're EFSA specific. On the EFSA slide, we saw the 5 life science agencies providing science for policy advice. Each has their own mandate and resources. Can they do more together, and if so, what? And also in a slightly different direction, but still about EFSA, how does EFSA see in more detail the use of the transdisciplinary principle? Do experts really exist, or is this just a term used to address global and complex issues? So take your choice. Okay, thank you very much. First, perhaps addressing here also the question that was made here from the gentleman in the front. Shouldn't perhaps lecture on how others should do their stuff, but thinking a little on how we do it on the food safety ecosystem. I mean, I would go at least with some basic principles that we could perhaps say, of course, but they're not sometimes so, of course. Transparency. It's an essential, when you start mixing elements and disciplines and opinions and positions, transparency and accountability. I think those are important factors within the work we do in food safety that help to put a little, the pieces on the right space. Then there needs to be a move for transdisciplinarity. I always say that. But transdisciplinary then means commitment. Commitment to resources, to have the science done like that. Otherwise, we won't reach that product. And then also a sort of commitment on long term, because it's easy to jump from priority to priorities. Some of these topics will take long-term investments of people, of funds, of resources, and that needs to be done. There needs to be a decision to really want to go into that direction. Whether it's a revolution or a transformation, I will not budge in, but if we want to go for one of those, then we need to commit.
And it takes more than a political cycle most of the times. Some will say it takes a generational cycle to really transform. With that, the last recommendation would be patient as well. Not everything happens overnight, unfortunately. So those were just a few ideas to share. On the two questions there, on the first one very quickly, yes, the 5 agencies, what more could we do, considering we have our own mandate and resources? Well, to be a good agency representative, I would say we would need more resources, but that I think anyone will say, even though one should say in some areas, and that links to the second question, where complexity is growing, in some areas where complexity really is growing, we have pesticides, we have novel foods, we have innovation in food process technologies. It's not totally a lie that we would benefit from more resources, not just in the agency, but in the ecosystem. We need more of you helping us in the member states to do our job. But within the agencies, what we would like to is perhaps to team up a little more. And team up can be things as simple as capacity building, which sounds straightforward, but it needs to be prepared. We need to roll on a program. We're all, of course, embodied in this One Health spirit that we need to work more closely together. And we have actually now the first joint mandate for the 5 agencies and GRC, actually. We've all been asking together to go and look, it doesn't matter, it's into a resistance against a fungal fungicide. For the first time, we are all going to look at the risks, look at the exposure, and give a joint opinion. It's another way to do more. But the last but not least, perhaps we could sometimes be more harmonized. And that takes, actually there's another question there about methodology. If we agree more across Europe that we will all look into, someone asking there about scientific reviews. If we all agree that we will look into how to do a systematic literature review in the same way, or we will, the weight of the evidence. If we could be more uncertainty, these are just transversal examples that impact opinions. If we can agree more within Europe, I'm not even saying internationally, within Europe how to do this, we may be a little closer to the resources. The last one was very quick, is on experts exist. Yes, I think experts exist, but we see that experts are becoming more and more expert in the very tiny little, and that is perhaps the inevitable path of science. We're getting more and more detail in more and more specific things. The challenge will always be for us then how to pick and combine more of these to provide the overview. So at the expert levels that we use in EFSA, we will always have a need for those that know the best science possible in the small details, but we do need people, that scientists that can also connect the dots, see a bit of the full picture. I cannot just triple the size of panels and quadruple the size of opinions to allow each small silo and specification of science. Then I will need 10 times more policy advisors to look at the opinion. So we can't go that way. So someone that's be specialized, but some people that can also connect the dots and see the systems, this holistic, this lens that allow you to understand the parts and see the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, the world needs more geographers. Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, yes, indeed, and I can see multiple questions still online and some hands in the room. I just want to pull out something. I want to momentarily use the moderator's prerogative to pull out something that's been mentioned a couple of times but hasn't really been addressed. And I think, Jacqueline, I want to ask you, because you mentioned it in your opening statement, about drawing on other sources of knowledge other than scientific sources of knowledge.
Yeah.
One often hears this, and my specific question is, what is the intention here? So is the idea that this will help, as it were, with implementation, that if we need this to understand how we can put our insights into practice, or is it alternatively or also that science is missing something? There's some knowledge that science cannot have access to, which we need other sources to get access to there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically about understanding it in a kind of status quo situation and understanding things in a moving way, in a dynamic way. Lots of knowledge that is relevant cannot be easily extracted by just asking questions. Tacit knowledge, experiential knowledge, is much of the knowledge that is embodied in people that is not easily extractable. You need to work together to get it. So that means that, and that's what I was talking about, transdisciplinary science, is this working together. You are going to do things in action with reflection and learning, so that you can really bring out that knowledge and bring it into your process. And indeed, it's about what works and what doesn't work, and how can we bring in those values that are often underneath a lot of things that people do and think. So
thank you.
that would be my very quick answer, but I hope it's clear.
It was very clear, thank you, yeah.
Okay.
I saw a hand or two waving still. Yes, this gentleman here. This will be the last question, sir, and then we need to wrap up.
Thank you. I'll be pressured.
Yes, indeed.
I'm Riccardo Siligato from the Joint Research Center, and I come in from the unit on food fraud. So my question is, I often scout the policy documents for references regarding protection and food fraud. However, it is a bit absent from the current discussion. Also today, I hear a lot about food fraud, food system transformation, for example, but not about protection. So my question is it already so complex, the transformation of the food system, that we don't have the resources to focus on the protection? Or is it possible to already think about maybe to slow a bit the process, but to better think how to protect against criminals, for example, because the turnover for the criminals in the food sector is much higher now than drugs, for example. So to me, there are big vulnerabilities in our food systems that I believe we are not addressing at the moment. Is it possible, or it is for a second stage? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants it?
I'm not sure, well, at least I'm not sure I'm very qualified, but I think linking what you said to the discussion about transformation and revolution, it's impossible to transform. It's also important to have good systems in place and keep the business as usual running. And I think that the examples you're given is that we may be thinking on how to move in the future, but we have now a system in place, a way we do things that needs to be protected against fraud, as you mentioned. But, you know, we also have a climate emergency, for those who believe on that. That needs action now, even if we have a plan to transform into the future. We have an economic ongoing crisis in Europe that needs solutions now, even if we want to have better systems in the future. So let's keep our eyes ahead. I support that, but we do have a system that needs maintaining. And I think you gave an example of a maintenance issue that cannot be overlooked. And science, therefore, needs to address that as well. That's my humble...
I would like to add to it, but because we did studies with focus groups around Europe. Was also a question from the European Commission, trying to find out how people thought about food system transformation. And there we found that the problems that were listed, were voiced in relation to the food system, very much depended on which country we were in. And issues like food safety and food fraud did feature in some countries quite prominently. And so I think that if you link up with what I said about a place-based issue, and which also relates to culture, but also with the specific aspects of those systems, you will find and work with those problems that are felt there. So, setting research agendas and setting policy agendas together with different stakeholders locally, I would say that would really bring out those issues.
Thank you. And Eric, a final word, and we wrap up? No, but then in general, this is your last chance to say anything. The microphone is next to you.
Well, what strikes me in terms of policy advice, that most policy question is really about trade-offs. You know, you just promote something, and in return, you know, you have to give up something else. But here in the food system, there are a lot of win-win-wins, actually. You know, it's win for public health, win for the climate, win for biodiversity, win for animal welfare. So in theory, it should be a rather easy one. You know, it should be a... it's not. It's one of the most complicated ones, in fact. But even in terms of economic opportunities, you know, Europe is has a long tradition in producing these high-quality food products rather than the kind of mass production of low-quality things. And again, there's an opportunity there, and it's another win. But I'm afraid, you know, it's not how it's widely perceived.
Carlos, would you like a final word before we wrap up?
No, I think here that, perhaps here thinking of the future is that I think we all agree that there is a complexity, there is a need for evolution. Now I'm avoiding transformation and revolution, I move to evolution. But there is a need of connecting. And I think that scientists among themselves, scientists with policymakers, scientists with citizens, the more connected and interlinked we are, I think the better chance we have to solve these problems and addressing the hidden trade-offs, because I agree with you. It looks like a perfect dream, so why are we not there yet? But we're not there yet.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, on the perfect dream.
I think that it would be great if all of us would have, especially the ones that seem to be superior, having superior knowledge, superior positions to the truth or to power, realize that they are just one of the parts of the whole. And we really need the others, and they have very important things to say and to bring to the table, and we should do it together. So I fully agree with the collaboration aspect there. But being a bit more humble would be okay there.
Thank you very much. In fact, thank you to all three of you for a very lively discussion, and to the audience both online and in the room.